I was standing there, adjusting my silk veil before the massive mirror in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton. Around me, the air was thick with the sound of crystal flutes clinking and the scent of expensive perfume from 500 upper-class guests. Suddenly, the side door burst open, shattering the perfect atmosphere. My father, Elias, walked in with a limp, wearing a worn-out suit bought from a thrift store, a faded medal pinned to his chest. He looked lost amidst the luxury, like a black ink stain on a sheet of white silk. My chest tightened, the champagne glass in my hand nearly slipping to the floor. Silence drowned the room, followed by poisonous giggles. My mother-in-law, Elise, pursed her lips and covered her nose, signaling security as if my father were a stray, smelly animal. Hot blood rushed to my face, every muscle tensing in a fight reflex. Julian squeezed my hand tight, his fingernails digging painfully into my flesh, then whispered coldly in my ear, "Don't look, Amara. Security will take care of that trash. Don't let your father ruin the Ellington Corporation's big day." In that moment, the name Amara Simon no longer belonged to a happy bride. I looked at the man I was about to marry, then at the old father bowing his head in shame. The only question ringing in my head right now: should I continue this glamorous charade, or light the fuse and burn it all down? Marcos Ellington, Julian's younger brother, broke the heavy silence. He swaggered toward the door, a glass of dark scotch in one hand, his tuxedo unbuttoned at the collar in a display of calculated arrogance. He stopped inches from my father, invading his personal space. "Hey, old man," Marcos sneered, his voice booming across the silent ballroom. "You took a wrong turn. The soup kitchen is downtown in the gutters. This is the Ritz-Carlton, not a place for free handouts." His entourage of wealthy trust fund friends erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, sharp sound that echoed off the marble floors. My father didn't argue. He just lowered his head, his calloused hands trembling as they gripped the brim of his faded service cap. He tried to shrink into himself, to become invisible. This was a man who had survived the jungles of Vietnam, a man who had walked through fire for this country, now cowering before a boy who had never known a day of hardship in his life. Elise stepped forward, her face twisted in disgust. "Where is security?" she hissed, her voice sharp as a razor. Why was this creature allowed in? "He looks like he is carrying germs from a homeless shelter. Get him away before he soils my daughter-in-law's Vera Wang gown." My heart shattered. Creature. She called my father a creature. I turned to Julian. This was it. This was the moment. In the military, we call it the crucible. The moment under fire that reveals who you truly are. I waited for him to step up. I waited for him to say, "Stop. That is my family." I waited for the man I loved to show just an ounce of backbone. But Julian wouldn't even look at me. He looked at his mother, terrified, his eyes pleading for approval like a frightened child. Then he turned to Marcos and forced a laugh, desperate to fit in with them. "Mother is right," Julian said, his voice shaking slightly. "It is an unfortunate oversight. Marcos, tell the staff to escort him out the back door so the guests aren't disturbed." He turned back to me, tightening his grip on my arm, his voice dropping to a hiss through clenched teeth. "Amara, smile. Fix your face. Do not embarrass me. I will give the guy $500 to catch a cab back to wherever he came from. That is more than a guy like him makes in a month. It is generous." The world seemed to stop. $500. He was putting a price tag on my father's dignity. He was equating the man who raised me, the man who sacrificed everything, to a nuisance that could be paid off with pocket change. A cold, electric current shot down my spine. It was the same feeling I used to get right before a firefight, absolute clarity. The patience fuse in my brain snapped. I yanked my arm away from Julian's grip. The sudden movement made him stumble back. I looked down at my hand, at the 3-carat diamond ring that symbolized everything this life was supposed to be. It felt heavy. It felt like a shackle. Slowly, deliberately, I slid the ring off my finger. "Julian," I said. My voice was terrifyingly calm, carrying the weight of a commanding officer addressing a subordinate. "You just made the biggest tactical error of your entire life." I didn't hand him the ring. I turned to Elise, who was still holding her crystal flute of vintage champagne. I dropped the heavy diamond ring right into her glass. Splash. The expensive wine erupted, spraying over the front of her silver evening gown. Elise shrieked, jumping back as if she had been scalded. "I am aborting this mission," I screamed, my voice projecting to the back of the hall, silencing every whisper. "The wedding is over." Julian stood there, his mouth agape, his face turning a deep crimson. The humiliation hit him, and for the first time, I saw the rage behind his cowardice. He stepped forward and swung his hand. Crack! His palm connected with my cheek. It was a hard, stinging slap that echoed through the room. "You are insane," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You dare humiliate me after everything I bought for you?" My cheek burned, and I could taste the metallic tang of blood on my lip. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I slowly turned my head back to face him. I stood at my full height, squaring my shoulders, staring down at him with eyes that had seen things he couldn't even imagine in his nightmares. "You might have money, Julian," I said, my voice low and lethal. "But you and your family are so poor in character it makes me sick. I know I am not the only one who has felt this fire in their veins. If you would have walked out that door with me, hit that like button to show you stand with us. And tell me in the comments, would you have slapped him back? Type yes or no below." I turned my back on him, the ultimate sign of disrespect. I walked down the steps of the dais, past the gasping guests, straight toward the door. I reached my father. His eyes were wide, filled with tears and confusion. I took his rough, weather-beaten hand in mine and placed it gently on my arm. "Let's go, Dad," I said softly. "We don't belong in this golden pigsty." "Daughter," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Head up, Dad," I ordered gently. "We walk out with honor." And we did. I led him through the main doors, stepping out into the cool evening air, leaving behind the screaming of the Ellingtons and the stunned silence of 500 people who had just witnessed the bride burn her kingdom to the ground. The 1998 Ford F-150 rattled violently as we sped down the Pacific Coast Highway. The suspension was shot, and every bump in the road sent a tremor through the rusted frame. The cab smelled of old gasoline and stale coffee, a scent that used to mean safety to me, but now just smelled like poverty. I looked down at the white silk of my wedding dress, bunched up around my legs in the cramped passenger seat. It felt suffocating. With a sudden burst of frustration, I grabbed the long veil that was still pinned to my hair. I ripped it free, not caring if I tore out a few strands, and rolled down the window. The cold ocean air rushed in, stinging my tear-stained cheeks. I threw the veil out into the night. I watched in the side mirror as the wind caught it, a white ghost tumbling away into the darkness, disappearing just like the future I thought I had. Silence filled the truck, heavier than the humid air outside. My father gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He hadn't said a word since we left the Ritz-Carlton. "I am sorry, Amara," he finally said, his voice cracking. It was a sound I had never heard from him before. Defeat. "I ruined your future. I am just a useless old man." My heart broke all over again. The slap from Julian had hurt my pride, but this hurt my soul. "Don't say that, Dad," I whispered. "You didn't ruin anything. You saved me from making a mistake." We turned off the highway and bumped down the gravel driveway to our home, a small weathered log cabin tucked behind a grove of pine trees. Julian had visited here once. He had stood on the porch, wrinkled his nose, and called it a charming little hovel. At the time, I laughed it off. Now I realized he was just calling it a dump. Inside, the cabin was warm and familiar. The worn plaid recliner sat in the corner, and the walls were lined with photos of my graduation and my time in the service. Dad didn't sit down. He walked straight past the kitchen and into his small bedroom. "Sit down, Amara," he called out. His voice had changed. The waver was gone. I sank into the old recliner, exhausted. I heard the sound of something heavy being dragged across the wooden floor. A moment later, Dad emerged carrying a metal ammo box. It was olive drab, rusted at the corners, the kind used to store 50 caliber rounds. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Dad, please. We don't need guns right now. We're not going to war. Dad set the heavy box on the coffee table with a dull thud. He looked at me, and for the first time since the hotel, he stood straight. The limp was still there, but the hunch was gone. The shame was gone. In its place was the sharp, steel gaze of the sergeant who had led men through the A Shao Valley. "This isn't a weapon of war, daughter," he said quietly. "Or maybe it is. It is the weapon I have been preparing for this exact day for 30 years. He unlatched the heavy metal clasp. Click, clack. I leaned forward, expecting to see old letters, maybe his Purple Heart, or family heirlooms. But as he lifted the lid, the smell of old paper wafted up. Inside, stacked neatly in rows, were bundles of documents. Dad reached in and pulled out a yellowed certificate. He handed it to me. "Look at the date," he said. I took the paper. It was a stock certificate. Apple Computer, Inc., dated 1985. I looked at the number of shares. My eyes widened. "Dad," I stammered. He didn't answer. He handed me another. Berkshire Hathaway, Class A. Purchased in 1982. Then another. Treasury bonds. Deeds to commercial real estate in downtown Houston and Austin. My hands started to shake. I looked from the papers to the rusty box, then to my father's face. He was wearing a flannel shirt that he had mended himself at the elbows. He drove a truck that struggled to hit 60 miles per hour. Is this real?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dad walked over to the kitchen sink and poured himself a glass of tap water. He took a slow sip, looking calm, almost bored. "When I came back from Vietnam," he began, his voice steady, "I didn't buy a fancy car. I didn't buy a big house. I took every cent of my disability check and my wages from the mill, and I invested it. I bought into companies that made things people needed. I bought land when it was dirt cheap." He set the glass down and looked me right in the eye. "I lived like a poor man because I wanted you to grow up with grit, Amara. I wanted you to build your own character, not rest on a cushion of cash. I wanted you to know the value of $1 and the value of hard work." He pointed a calloused finger at the box. "But today, those people spat on our honor. They judged us by the clothes on our backs. They declared war on our dignity." He pushed the ammo box across the table toward me. "The current valuation of the assets in that box is approximately $1.2 billion, he said. The number hung in the air, heavy and impossible. "I am the largest anonymous shareholder of the very banks that hold the debt for the Ellington Corporation." My breath caught in my throat. The man they had tried to give $500 to for a taxi could buy and sell their entire lineage before breakfast. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. "This is your arsenal now," Dad said, his voice dropping to that command tone I knew so well. "You have the training, you have the discipline, and now you have the firepower." He leaned in, his eyes blazing. "Use it. Teach them a lesson about loyalty. Teach them that you can't judge a book by its cover, and you certainly don't kick a sleeping dragon." Wow, talk about a secret weapon. I bet Julian is going to wish he never offered that $500. If you love seeing the underdog win, smash that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, if you found out you were secretly a billionaire, what is the first thing you would buy? A new house? A fast car? Or maybe a little revenge? Let me know below. Dad stood there, waiting for my answer. He wasn't asking me to spend the money on yachts or vacations. He was asking me to go to war. I looked at the box. I looked at the deeds and the stocks. I thought about Elise's face when she called him a creature. I thought about Julian's cowardice. I stood up, wiping the last tear from my cheek. I squared my shoulders. "General," I said, a small, dangerous smile touching my lips. "I accept the mission." The next morning, I didn't wake up crying. I woke up at 0430. It was a habit ingrained in me from my years at Fort Bragg. When your world is falling apart, you don't fall with it. You make your bed, you brew coffee, you secure your perimeter. I cleared the breakfast dishes off the small oak table in our kitchen and turned it into a forward operating base. I dragged a whiteboard from the garage, something I used to use for grocery lists, and started drawing. In the center, I wrote, Ellington Corporation. Branching out from it were names: Brantley, Elise, Julian, Marcos. Dad sat nearby, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. He wasn't just my father anymore. He was my strategic advisor. We need a cover, I said, uncapping a red marker. If they see the name Simon coming for them, they will circle the wagons. Vanguard, Dad said, not looking up from his coffee. Vanguard Holdings, registered in Delaware. Anonymous LLC. I nodded and wrote it down. Perfect. Our objective isn't to burn the company to the ground, Dad. There are good people working there, secretaries, janitors, middle managers trying to feed their families. We are not terrorists. I circled the name Brantley Ellington in thick red ink. The objective is a surgical strike, I said. We cut off the head of the snake. With Dad's capital as our ammunition, I didn't hire slick Wall Street lawyers in $3,000 suits. I knew their type. They could be bought. Instead, I reached out to my old network. I recruited a team of economic mercenaries. First, I contacted Miller, a private investigator who used to run intelligence for special forces. Then, I found Sarah, a forensic accountant who had been fired from a Big Four firm because she refused to overlook discrepancies in a client's audit. She was hungry, and she hated bullies. We convened a secure video conference later that morning. Listen up, I told them, my voice steady. Your mission is simple. I want every skeleton in the Ellington closet. I want to know what they eat, who they sleep with, and most importantly, where they hide their dirty money. Dig deep. Leave no stone unturned. They went to work. For 48 hours, the cabin was silent except for the clicking of keyboards and the hum of the coffee maker. When the first intelligence report came back, it was worse than I had imagined. Sarah sent over a file labeled Ellington for Veterans. It was a charity Brantley had started 5 years ago, supposedly to help returning soldiers with housing and medical bills. It was the shiny gold star on his public reputation. He was always in the society pages, holding a gala, talking about how much he loved our brave heroes. I opened the spreadsheet, and my stomach turned. Dad, I said, my voice tight. You need to see this. He walked over and leaned in, squinting at the screen. Look at the expense ratios, I pointed out. 80% of the donations go to administrative costs and fundraising events. Last year, they spent $200,000 on a single dinner at the Plaza Hotel. Only 12% actually made it to veterans. Dad's jaw tightened. He read the lines silently. Catering, private jet charter, consultation fees paid to Marcos Ellington. Brantley wasn't helping veterans. He was using them as a human shield to dodge taxes and fund his family's lavish lifestyle. He was using the broken bodies of men like my father to buy champagne for his wife. The hypocrisy was nauseating. It was a violation of the sacred trust between a nation and its warriors. Dad stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the pine trees, his hands balling into fists at his sides. I knew what he was thinking about. He was thinking about the friends he lost in the jungle. He was thinking about the guys who came home and drank themselves to death because they couldn't get help from the VA, while men like Brantley Ellington ate steak dinners in their name. The Bible says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Brantley Ellington was about to learn that verse the hard way. Dad turned back to me. His eyes were dark, dangerous. "This isn't personal anymore, Amara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is an insult to the flag. It is a desecration." He looked at the whiteboard, at the red circle around Brantley's name. "You have authorization," he said. "Fire at will." I nodded, feeling a cold calm settle over me. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for our broker. "Initiate Phase 1, I commanded. "Start buying up Ellington Corporation's bad debt. Every distressed bond, every overdue loan. I want to own their mistakes." I paused, looking at the file on the screen. "And get ready to leak the charity audit to the press. We are going to show the world what hell really looks like." My private investigator, Miller, called me with a lead that changed everything. The fortress has a crack in the wall, he said. Her name is Clara. Clara was the Ellington family's housekeeper. She had been with them for 20 years, practically raising Julian and Marcos while Elise was busy shopping and Brantley was busy fundraising. But last week she was fired. No severance, no thank you, just kicked to the curb. I arranged to meet her at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. It was the kind of place with flickering neon signs, vinyl booths patched with duct tape, and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Clara sat in a corner booth, her shoulders hunched, staring into a cold cup of tea. She looked 10 years older than the last time I saw her. Her hands, rough and red from years of scrubbing floors, were twisted together nervously on the Formica table. "Mrs. Clara?" I said softly, sliding into the booth opposite her. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and full of fear. When she saw me, she started to cry. "Oh, Miss Amara," she sobbed quietly, reaching for a napkin. "I am so sorry about the wedding. I heard everything." "Don't worry about me, Clara," I said, reaching across the table to cover her hands with mine. "Tell me what happened to you." She took a shaky breath. 20 years. I gave them 20 years of my life. I missed my own son's graduation because Elise needed me to polish the silver for a party. And then, last Tuesday, I dropped a serving platter. Just one plate. It was an accident. Elise. She screamed at me. She said I was too old, too clumsy. She told me to pack my things and get out before she called the police. "They threw you out like trash," I said, feeling a fresh wave of anger rising in my chest. "Like garbage," Clara confirmed, wiping her eyes. "Not even a dime for my retirement. I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent next month." I squeezed her hand tighter. "I'm going to help you, Clara. But I need you to help me first. I need to know where the bodies are buried." Clara looked around the diner nervously, then leaned in closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mr. Brantley. He keeps a safe. It is hidden behind the wine rack in the cellar, the vintage Bordeaux section." "Do you know the code?" I asked. Clara let out a bitter, dry laugh. "He thinks nobody knows. He thinks the help is invisible, deaf, and dumb. But I know. It is the birthday of his first mistress, the one from before he met Elise." She grabbed a grease-stained napkin and a pen from her purse. With a trembling hand, she scribbled down a series of numbers. She slid it across the table to me. "That will get you the ledgers," she whispered. "But that is not the worst of it." She dug into her purse again and pulled out a small silver USB drive. She held it tightly for a moment, as if it burned her skin, before placing it on the table. "What is this?" I asked, eyeing the drive. "Marcos," she said, her voice trembling with disgust. He likes to record things. He thinks it is funny. Last year, there was a party, a wild one, a young waitress. She was just a college student trying to pay tuition. Marcos, he put something in her drink. My blood ran cold. "I found this in his room when I was cleaning," Clara continued, tears streaming down her face again. "I watched it. It is evil, Miss Amara." He laughed. He laughed while she couldn't even stand up. That poor girl. She took her own life 3 months later. I picked up the USB drive. It felt heavy, heavier than the diamond ring I had thrown away. This wasn't just evidence of corruption. This was evidence of a monster. Marcos, the boy who mocked my father for being poor, was a predator hiding behind his daddy's money. "Thank you, Clara," I said, my voice steel. "You just gave me the nail for their coffin." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a personal check I had written before coming here, drawn from my father's funds. I slid it across the table. Clara picked it up, confused. When she looked at the number, she gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. $500,000, she stammered. "Miss Amara, I can't. This is too much. I didn't sell you this information for money." "This isn't a bribe, Clara," I said firmly. "This is your pension." This is the severance pay you earned for 20 years of service. It is back pay for every holiday you missed and every insult you swallowed. Clara broke down, sobbing openly now. But these were tears of relief. Take it, I urged. Cash it tomorrow morning. Pack your bags. Leave town. Go live with your son. Be safe. She looked at me, clutching the check to her chest like a lifeline. You are a good woman, Amara. You and your father. You are the real nobility. She stood up to leave, looking lighter, taller. Before she walked out the door, she turned back to me one last time. Her eyes were dry now, and fierce. Give them hell, Captain, she said. I pocketed the napkin and the USB drive. Oh, I will, Clara. I whispered to the empty booth. I will give them hell. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. The opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange was about to ring, and I was sitting at my kitchen table in front of a battered laptop, ready to pull the trigger. Execute, I whispered, hitting the enter key. Through Vanguard Holdings, we unleashed a massive short-selling campaign against Ellington Corporation stock. At the exact same moment, I hit send on an encrypted email to the investigative desk at the New York Times. Attached was Sarah's forensic audit of the Ellington for Veterans charity, along with copies of the receipts for private jets and parties. The headline hit the digital front page 30 minutes later. Scandal. Billionaire Brantley Ellington accused of stealing from wounded vets to fund mistress and lavish lifestyle. It was a bloodbath. I watched the real-time stock ticker on my screen. Ellington Corp., which had opened at $85 a share, began to freefall. 70, 65, 50. The graph was a steep, jagged red line plunging straight to hell. Panic selling set in. Wall Street hates uncertainty, but it hates fraud even more. But I wasn't done yet. Phase 2, I muttered. I uploaded the video Clara had given me, the one of Marcos bragging about bribing the police after a DUI, laughing about how laws are for poor people. I posted it to Twitter and TikTok using a burner account. Within 2 hours, the hashtag #JesusBoycottEllington was the #1 trending topic in the world. The internet did what it does best. It exploded with righteous fury. I watched videos of veterans burning Ellington-branded merchandise in their driveways. I saw mothers crying, sharing stories of how their sons were denied benefits while Brantley was drinking vintage wine. The public didn't just want an apology, they wanted blood. I pulled up the live feed from a news helicopter circling the Ellington estate. A mob of angry protesters had already gathered at the gates. They held signs that read, "Traitors and stolen valor." Inside the house, it was chaos. Through a hacked security feed, courtesy of my PI, Dean Miller, I watched them unravel. Elise was pacing the living room, screaming into her phone, then smashing a vase against the wall when her lawyer presumably told her she was screwed. Brantley was slumped in an armchair, a glass of scotch trembling in his hand, looking like a man watching his own execution. And Julian? My brave, strong Julian? He tried to go live on Instagram to do damage control. It was pathetic. He sat there in a perfectly pressed shirt, eyes red, trying to look sympathetic. Please, he begged the camera. These are just allegations. My family loves this country. The comment stream was a blur of hatred. Coward. Mama's boy. Give back the money. You deserve to rot. He lasted 3 minutes before he broke down crying and ended the stream. He ran to his room and locked the door. They were feeling it now. The isolation, the shame, the helplessness. It was the exact feeling they had forced on my father in that hotel lobby, only amplified by a million screaming voices. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the banks started calling. They were pulling their lines of credit. Vendors were canceling contracts. The stock price hit rock bottom. $12 a share. The company was technically insolvent. It was time for the kill shot. Phase 3, I said to Dad. We are going fishing. Vanguard Holdings stopped selling and started buying. With the stock price in the gutter, we bought up every share the panicked investors were dumping. We bought the debt from the banks for pennies on the dollar. We swallowed the company whole while it was drowning. By 4 o'clock, the market closed. I checked the final tally. Vanguard Holdings now owned 51% of the voting shares of Ellington Corporation. We owned the controlling interest. We owned them. I closed the laptop with a satisfying snap. The silence in the cabin was heavy, but it was a good silence. It was the silence of victory. I turned to my father. He was sitting in his recliner, polishing his silver star medal with a soft cloth. He looked up at me, his eyes clear and sharp. "The perimeter is secure, Captain," he said. "It is time to retake the command post." I nodded. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the Ellington Corporation's board secretary. "This is Vanguard Holdings," I said, my voice ice cold. "Schedule an emergency shareholder meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. The new owners will be in attendance." Yes, ma'am," the secretary stammered. Who should I say is coming?" "Just tell them," I said, a smile finally touching my lips. "That judgment day has arrived." The elevator doors chimed softly, opening onto the 50th floor. This was the sanctuary of Brantley Ellington, a fortress of glass and steel that screamed power. But today, the air smelled of fear. I stepped out, my heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. I wasn't wearing a wedding dress this time. I was wearing a tailored black power suit, my hair pulled back in a severe bun. Beside me walked my father, Elias. He was still wearing his worn thrift store suit and his faded service cap. He limped, yes, but his head was held high, his eyes scanning the room like he was inspecting the troops. We pushed open the heavy double doors to the boardroom. The Ellington family was already seated around the massive mahogany table. They looked like ghosts. Brantley was unshaven, his eyes bloodshot. Elise was pale, clutching a handkerchief. Julian sat with his head in his hands. Marcos was jittery, his eyes darting around the room, clearly high on something. When we walked in, the room went dead silent. Julian looked up, his jaw dropping. "Amara? What? What are you doing here? Where is security?" The corporate secretary, a nervous woman named Linda, stood up from the corner. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Ellington," she stammered, looking at Brantley. "May I introduce the representatives of Vanguard Holdings, the new majority owners of Ellington Corporation." Brantley shot out of his chair so fast his leather seat toppled over. His face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "What?" he roared, spit flying from his mouth. "You? This little brat is the owner? And that beggar? That old, crippled beggar?" I didn't flinch. I walked calmly to the head of the table, stood right in front of him, and slammed a thick stack of stock certificates down on the polished wood. Thud. "You call my father a beggar, Brantley," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a knife. "This man just bought the chair you are sitting in. He bought the roof over your head. He bought your company, your debt, and your entire pathetic legacy." I leaned in closer, looking him dead in the eye. "He owns you." The truth hit them like a physical blow. Elise let out a small gasp and slumped back in her chair, fainting dead away. Julian stared at me, his eyes wide with horror, looking at me like I was an alien creature he had never seen before. They realized finally that they had spit on a sleeping dragon. "No," Marcos muttered. He stood up, swaying slightly. His eyes were wild, dilated pupils swimming in a sea of red. "No, you ruined everything, you bitch!" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a box cutter. He flicked the blade out, a jagged, rusty piece of metal. "Marcos, stop!" Julian screamed, shrinking back in his chair but making no move to help me. Marcos lunged. He came at me with a clumsy, desperate swing, aiming for my face. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. My training took over instantly. Muscle memory is faster than thought. As he slashed downward, I sidestepped to the left. I caught his wrist with my left hand and twisted it hard against the joint. Snap. Marcos howled in pain, dropping the knife. But I wasn't done. I grabbed the back of his neck with my other hand and slammed his face down onto the hard mahogany table. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud. Marcos groaned, blood trickling from his nose onto the expensive wood finish. I held him there, pinned, his arm twisted painfully behind his back. In the army, Marcos, I whispered into his ear, we neutralize threats with lethal force. You are lucky I'm wearing civilian clothes today. The room was frozen. Brantley was shaking. Julian was sobbing. I shoved Marcos away, letting him slide to the floor like a sack of garbage. I straightened my jacket, not a hair out of place. I picked up the remote control on the table and turned on the large wall-mounted screen. It displayed a live feed from the lobby downstairs. FBI agents in blue windbreakers were swarming the entrance. Here's the situation report, I announced coldly. Brantley, I pointed at him. The FBI is downstairs. They have the audit of your charity. You are going to prison for embezzlement and fraud. You will die in a cell. Brantley sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Marcos. I looked down at the whimpering mess on the floor. The police have the video from the USB drive. You are being charged with sexual assault and drug possession. Enjoy general population. And Elise, I glanced at the unconscious woman. She is bankrupt. Every asset she has is frozen. Finally, I turned to Julian. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, looking like a lost little boy. Amara, please, he choked out. And you, Julian, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. You committed no crime, except the crime of being a coward, a spineless, useless mama's boy. I leaned down so our faces were inches apart. Your sentence is life. You have to live with the knowledge that you had a diamond, and you threw it away for a handful of dust. You have to live as a nobody. I straightened up and pointed to the door. Now, get the hell out of my company. Immediately. Security guards, loyal to the new paycheck, marched in. They hauled a screaming Brantley and a sobbing Marcos out of the room. Julian stumbled after them, broken. Their screams echoed down the hallway. It was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Justice is served, and it tastes delicious. If you cheered when Amara took down Marcos, hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, what is the best punishment for a coward like Julian? Prison or being broke and alone? Type prison or broke below. I stood in the silence of the empty boardroom. I looked at my father. He gave me a slow, proud nod. The war was over. We had won. That night, the atmosphere in our small log cabin was surreal. We had just conquered a billion-dollar empire, yet we were celebrating with a $5 frozen pepperoni pizza we heated up in the oven. Dad and I sat on the worn-out couch, the blue light of the television flickering across our faces. We watched the evening news in silence. The anchor woman's voice was grave. Breaking news tonight, the fall of the Ellington dynasty. The screen cut to live footage outside the courthouse. It was the classic perp walk. Brantley Ellington, the man who had sneered at my father just days ago, was being led out in handcuffs. He tried to hide his face with his suit jacket, shielding himself from the flashing cameras, but there was no hiding the slump of his shoulders. He looked small, defeated. Then came the footage of Marcos. He wasn't hiding. He was screaming, his face contorted in a drug-fueled rage as two officers shoved him into the back of a squad car. He looked less like a wealthy heir and more like a rabid animal. The final shot was of the Ellington estate. Yellow police tape, crime scene do not cross, was strung across the majestic iron gates. Federal agents were carrying out boxes of documents. The kingdom was officially closed for business. I looked at my father, expecting to see a smile of triumph. But Dad just sighed, taking a bite of his pizza. Look at him, Amara, he said softly, pointing a crust at the screen where Brantley was being shoved into a police van. Take away the expensive suit, take away the country club membership, and what is left? Just a scared old man who knows he did wrong. He was right. There was no glory in it. Just a sad, pathetic end to a life built on greed. The fallout continued for weeks. Elise, the woman who once claimed that breathing the same air as poor people gave her a headache, was now homeless. The bank had seized everything. We heard through the grapevine that she was couch surfing at a distant cousin's house in New Jersey. She was selling her collection of vintage Hermes Birkin bags on eBay just to pay her retainer for a public defender. The exclusive country club she had ruled like a queen quietly revoked her membership. She had become a social pariah. But Julian's fate was perhaps the cruelest. He wasn't in jail, but he was in a prison of his own making. The internet had turned him into a living joke. Someone had taken a screenshot of his crying face from his disastrous live stream and turned it into a meme. It was everywhere. The face of cowardice. Mama's Boy of the Year. He couldn't go to a coffee shop without someone snapping a picture and laughing. He had lost his wife, his family's fortune, and his dignity. The punishment was more brutal than any physical beating could have been. I looked down at my phone. It had been buzzing nonstop for hours. Texts from friends I hadn't heard from in years, messages from distant relatives suddenly remembering they loved me. Everyone wanted a piece of the new heiress. Hey girl, long time no see. We should grab drinks. So proud of you, Amara. I always knew you were special. I felt a wave of nausea. Where were these people when Julian slapped me? Where were they when my father was being humiliated? I held down the power button and turned the phone off. The screen went black and the room was quiet again. It feels empty, I admitted, staring at the dark screen. We won, Dad. We destroyed them. But I don't feel happy. I feel tired. I wondered if I had crossed a line. Nietzsche once said, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." Had I become just as ruthless as them? Dad reached over and placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. It grounded me instantly. That is because you are a builder, Amara, not a destroyer, he said wisely. Don't let the hate eat you up. The demolition phase is over. We cleared the rot. We tore down the unstable structure. He looked me in the eye, his expression serious. Now comes the hard part, Captain. Now comes the reconstruction. You have a company to run. You have thousands of employees depending on you. Turn that corrupt organization into a real fortress. Make it something honorable. His words were like a lighthouse cutting through the fog. He was right. The revenge was just the beginning. The real victory would be in building something better from the ashes. Reconstruction, I whispered, testing the word. It sounded good. It sounded like hope. I picked up another slice of pizza. Okay, Dad. Tomorrow we start building. Sunday morning. The sky was a crisp, brilliant blue, the kind that hurts your eyes if you look up too long. I drove the old Ford F-150 down the winding road to the National Cemetery. We didn't take a limo. We didn't wear designer suits. It was just me and Dad in our Sunday best. The truck bed rattling with every bump, a bouquet of white daisies resting on the dashboard. We walked through the iron gates, entering a world of perfect silent geometry. Row after row of white marble headstones stretched out across the rolling green hills, endless lines of men and women who had given everything. There is a specific kind of quiet in a military cemetery. It isn't empty, it is full of honor. Dad walked with his usual limp, but his spine was straight. He stopped in front of a small, simple stone under an old oak tree. Margaret Simon, beloved wife and mother. Dad knelt down slowly, his knees popping, and placed the daisies against the cold stone. He rested his hand on top of it, tracing her name with his thumb. She would have skinned me alive if she knew about the mess I made this week. He chuckled softly, but his eyes were shining with tears. Your mother. She never liked to fuss. I sat down on the grass beside him, pulling my knees to my chest. The wind rustled the leaves above us. Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out his silver star medal. The ribbon was frayed, the metal dull with age. He wiped it gently with the hem of his flannel shirt. Amara, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I have to tell you something. I have to confess. I looked at him, waiting. I was afraid, he admitted. He looked down at the medal, avoiding my eyes. When I made that first million back in the 80s, I was terrified. I looked around and I saw what money did to people. I saw it turn good men into greedy fools. I saw it raise children who were soft, entitled, and cruel. Children like Marcos Ellington. He took a shaky breath. I looked at you, my little girl. And I was so scared that if you knew we were rich, you would lose your edge. I wanted you to have steel in your spine, Amara. I wanted you to know how to fight. So I hid it. I let you struggle. I let you join the army to pay for college. He finally looked at me, and the pain in his eyes was raw. I am sorry I lied to you. I am sorry I made life harder than it had to be. My heart swelled in my chest. I looked at this man, this millionaire who mended his own shirts, this hero who let the world think he was a nobody just to protect his daughter's soul. I reached out and took his rough, calloused hand. I pressed it against my cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin, the texture of a lifetime of hard work. Hot tears spilled over my lashes. "Dad," I choked out, "don't you dare apologize." I squeezed his hand. "You gave me the greatest inheritance in the world, and it wasn't the $1 billion in that ammo box. It was this." I touched his chest, right over his heart. It was integrity. It was knowing how to stand tall when the whole world wants you to kneel. It was knowing that a man's worth isn't in his wallet, but in his character. Dad's face crumbled. He pulled me into a fierce hug. There, amidst the thousands of silent soldiers, we wept together. It wasn't the crying of grief. It was the crying of healing. It was the breaking of a dam that had held back years of secrets. That evening, back at the cabin, the air turned chill. I built a fire in the stone hearth, watching the flames lick at the dry logs. I went to my room and pulled a shoebox from the top shelf of my closet. It was labeled Julian. I carried it to the living room and sat on the rug before the fire. I opened the lid. Inside was a museum of a dead relationship. I picked up a bundle of letters, tied with a blue ribbon, love notes he had written me when we first started dating, full of sweet, empty promises. "I will love you forever, Amara. You are my rock. Lies, all lies." I tossed the bundle into the fire. The paper curled and blackened, the blue ribbon snapping as it dissolved into ash. Next were the photos. Us in Paris, smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower. Us in Venice, riding a gondola. He looked so handsome. I looked so happy. But now, looking closer, I saw the truth. I saw the way he was looking at his reflection in the water, not at me. I saw the possessive grip on my shoulder. I threw the photos in. The glossy paper bubbled and melted, his perfect smile distorting into a grotesque grimace before vanishing into the orange heat. One by one, I fed the memories to the flames. Movie stubs, dried flowers, the program from our engagement party. As the last item turned to ash, I felt a physical weight lift from my chest. The anger that had been burning a hole in my stomach for days was gone. The hate was gone. I watched the embers glow, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me. The fire had cleansed it all. I stood up and dusted off my hands. "Goodbye, Julian," I whispered to the dying flames. I turned away from the fire and walked toward the kitchen, where my dad was making hot chocolate. I was light, I was free, and I was ready for whatever came next. 3 weeks later, the heavy brass letters spelling out Ellington Corp. Were pried off the granite facade of the downtown headquarters. They left ghost-like outlines on the stone, fading memories of a corrupt regime. In their place, a new sign was installed. It was simple, modern steel, Simon and Company. Next to it was our new logo, a stylized torch symbolizing light in the darkness. I walked through the revolving glass doors, not as the rejected daughter-in-law, but as the chairwoman of the board. The lobby was quiet. The receptionists and security guards watched me with a mix of awe and terror. They had read the news. They knew I had dismantled the old ownership in a single afternoon. They were waiting for the axe to fall, expecting mass firings. But I wasn't there to destroy. I was there to lead. I called an all-hands meeting in the main atrium. Hundreds of employees gathered, whispering nervously, clutching their coffee cups. I stood on the mezzanine, looking down at the sea of faces. "Good morning," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "I know many of you are worried about your jobs. You are wondering if I'm going to clean house?" I paused, letting the tension build. The answer is yes. And no. I saw a ripple of confusion move through the crowd. The executives who helped Brantley Ellington steal from veterans, They are gone, I announced. The managers who looked the other way while corruption rotted this company from the inside out? They were escorted out by security an hour ago. A few gasps, then silence. But for the rest of you, the ones who did the work, who stayed late, who were overlooked and underpaid while the Ellingtons threw parties on your dime, you are the foundation of this company. And starting today, the rules have changed. I held up a thick binder. No more corporate jets. No more expense accounts for vintage wine. That money is going back into the company. Effective immediately, we are implementing a profit-sharing program for every employee, from the janitors to the junior analysts. If this company wins, we all win. The silence broke. A few people started to clap. And one more thing, I added, smiling. We are establishing the Amara Simon Scholarship Fund. It will provide full college tuition for the children of any employee who is a veteran of the United States Armed Forces. The applause grew into a roar. It wasn't polite clapping, it was a thunderous release of relief and joy. I saw grown men wiping their eyes. I saw secretaries high-fiving. For the first time in decades, this building felt like a place of purpose, not just a place of profit. While we were building a future, the Ellingtons were facing their new reality. And karma, as it turns out, has a poetic sense of humor. A paparazzi photo surfaced online showing Elise Ellington. She wasn't at the Ritz-Carlton. She was sitting on a city bus, sandwiched between a construction worker and a teenager with loud headphones. She was wearing a polyester tracksuit she had likely bought at Walmart. The caption read, "From couture to commuter." The social circle she had desperate tried to impress had completely exiled her. She was learning that when you build your identity on money, you become nobody the moment it's gone. Marcos was faring even worse. Reports from the county jail said he was having a difficult adjustment period. Apparently, his cellmate, a large man named Tiny who didn't appreciate entitled rich kids, was teaching him some manners. Marcos was finally learning that in the real world, respect is earned, not bought. That weekend, I hosted a party. It wasn't a gala. There was no champagne tower. It was a backyard barbecue at our log cabin. The guest list was small. Clara was there, laughing and helping flip burgers, looking 10 years younger now that the stress was gone. Sarah, the accountant who helped take down Brantley, was there with her kids. A few of Dad's old army buddies sat on the porch, nursing cold beers and telling war stories that got more exaggerated with every sip. The air smelled of charcoal smoke and grilled ribs. Music, old classic rock, played from a portable speaker. I looked over at the picnic table. Dad sat at the head, a paper plate full of potato salad in front of him. He was laughing at something Clara said, his head thrown back, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He looked happy. Truly, deeply happy. I took a sip of my iced tea and leaned against the porch railing. We didn't have a billion-dollar yacht. We didn't have a mansion in the Hamptons. But looking around at these good, loyal people, hearing the genuine laughter ringing through the trees, I realized something. This was the real high society. This was wealth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt rich. It was late afternoon, about 2 months after the takeover. I was sitting on the porch of our new lake house, a modest place, quiet and secluded, far away from the prying eyes of the city. I had a book in my lap, but I wasn't reading. I was watching the sunlight dance on the water, enjoying the simple luxury of peace. Then, I saw him. Julian was standing at the end of the driveway, outside the iron gate. He wasn't driving his Porsche, he was on foot. His clothes, usually tailored to perfection, were wrinkled and stained. His face was gaunt, unshaven, the hollow eyes of a man who hasn't slept in days. He didn't ring the buzzer. He just stood there, gripping the bars of the gate like a prisoner looking out. I put my book down and walked slowly down the gravel path. I didn't feel my heart race. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. When I reached the gate, I didn't open it. I looked at him through the bars. "Amara," he rasped, his voice cracking. Tears welled up in his eyes instantly. "Amara, please. I need to talk to you." "You are trespassing, Julian," I said calmly. I know, he sobbed, wiping his nose with his sleeve. I just I have nowhere else to go. I lost everything. My friends, my money, my reputation. Even my mother won't speak to me. I am all alone. He looked at me with desperate, pleading eyes. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I still love you. Please, give me another chance. We can start over. I will be better. I looked at the man who had once been my whole world. I remembered how he laughed with his brother when my father was humiliated. I remembered the sting of his slap on my cheek. Julian, I said, my voice steady as the lake water behind me. Do you know what the most important thing is on a battlefield? He shook his head, confused. It isn't courage, I continued. And it isn't firepower. It is loyalty. It is knowing that the person next to you has your back. It is knowing that when the bullets start flying, they won't run. I took a step closer to the gate. When the first shot was fired in that hotel lobby, you didn't just run. You joined the enemy. You let your own teammates, me and my father, get cut down. You watched us bleed, and you offered us $500 to make the bleeding stop. Julian dropped to his knees in the dirt. I was scared. I was weak. Please, Amara, forgive me. I looked down at him. There was no hate left in my heart, only pity. Pity for a man who had never learned how to be a man. I can't build a future with a deserter, Julian, I said coldly. You have been dishonorably discharged from my life, permanently. Amara, no, he wailed. Go, I commanded. Find a job, learn to work, learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Maybe one day you will find some self-respect. But you won't find it here. I turned my back on him. I walked back up the driveway, my steps light and rhythmic. Behind me, I heard him crying, calling my name, but the sound grew fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the wind. I didn't look back, not once. I walked around to the back of the house, down to the small wooden dock that jutted out into the lake. Dad was sitting there in a folding chair, a fishing rod in his hand, a bucket beside him. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, reflecting off the water like liquid gold. He heard my footsteps and turned, his face breaking into a wide, toothy grin. Hey there, Captain, he called out. You missed it. I just caught a big bass, a real fighter. I sat down on the edge of the dock, dangling my feet over the water. I leaned my head on his shoulder. He smelled of Old Spice and fresh air, the smell of safety. I handled the intruder, Dad, I said softly. He nodded, reeling in his line slowly. I knew you would. You always know what to do. We sat there in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. The water lapped gently against the wood. A loon called out in the distance. I realized then that this was it. This was the victory. It wasn't the corner office. It wasn't the millions in the bank. It wasn't even seeing the Ellingtons fall. The real victory was this peace. It was sitting here with the man who raised me, knowing that we had kept our souls intact. We had walked through the fire and come out cleaner on the other side. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cool evening air. Mission accomplished, Captain, I whispered to myself. Did you say something, honey? Dad asked. I smiled, squeezing his arm. Just that I am happy, Dad. I am finally happy. This journey taught me that true wealth isn't what you carry in your bank account. It's what you carry in your heart. Julian and his family had everything money could buy, yet they were spiritually bankrupt. My father, in his thrift store suit, was the richest man in the room because he possessed integrity, loyalty, and unconditional love. We often chase status, thinking it will earn us respect. But respect is only earned through character. Never compromise who you are for a seat at a table where you aren't truly valued. Walking away with your dignity is always the biggest victory. I hope my story reminded you of the quiet heroes in your own life, the ones who sacrifice in silence like my dad. If this story touched your heart or made you cheer for the underdog, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone to save your self-respect? Tell me your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice, family, and finding the strength to start over. Thank you for listening.